When I was 19, I had an empty handle of vodka in my hand, half an 8-ball of cocaine in my pocket, and I had crushed up 4 oxys that I had snorted. I was standing over I-81 watching the cars pass, and I was going to jump and kill myself. Hell of an opener, right? Fact of the matter is, I'm not alone. This was in Southwest Virginia at the height of the painkiller epidemic. I was 19 years old. And I was standing there, just feeling the breeze of the cars drift by. And I sort of felt this pull within me, kind of telling me not to jump. This was after weeks of me just bare knuckling, holding on to this conversation inside of my head of, I am so done here, I should just kill myself. No, I shouldn't. Maybe this will pass. I was feeling a permanent panic attack. Because what had happened was, I got in a car accident a few months ago with a friend of mine who was an addict because he got cancer when he was 14 years old in his eye, had it removed, had a painkiller prescription every day since then. We went to buy oxys off of a woman dying of cancer. She came out with her IV. We got in a car accident driving back. He felt bad, so he gave me 20 or 30 of these Roxys, which are hyper-concentrated, 80 milligrams. Went for about 150 a pop. So I thought, cool, maybe I'll sell some of these. Suddenly, I just sort of blacked out for 3 months of my life. I was an addict before that, though. I started smoking weed at 15. I was drinking sort of every day, using any relationship I could. All of it was about numbing what was ever in between anything I was experiencing and the persona I wanted to show everybody. See, I grew up as a problem child. I had ADHD, and I grew up in Houston, Texas. They have a certain way of treating a kid that can't sit still down there. I still hold the record for most suspensions ever given to a kid at the elementary school I went to in Houston. I know, because when I went to graduate school, I reconnected with my school counselor. She told me. So I asked her to make me a trophy, and she did. See, ADHD is not a genetic disorder. It's a neurobiological adaptation to experiencing too much stress without enough support to build the internal structures you need to regulate stress within your body. There's a reason that when you look at ADHD diagnoses within the last 40 years, it goes like this. And it's not because everyone is genetically evolving to become more scattered. It is because of the system in which we exist around ourselves. We are environmental beings. About 300,000 years ago, give or take, depending on which historian you ask, Homo sapiens sapiens arrived on the planet. Their nervous systems are so similar to ours that those historians and neurobiologists suggest that if you were to get a time machine and get one of those infants just after they were born and bring them to modern day and have them raised, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. That's important because there are millions of years of evolution that led up to that point, that wired our hardware, a hardware most of us aren't taught about, that has specific needs, biopsychosocial spiritual needs that make up what our well-being is, and it was made for a certain context. Then, for about 97% of the time that Homo sapiens existed on this planet, as we continued to reinforce certain ways of being within our hardware, we still were hunter-gatherer nomads that lived in tribes. Anyone in here ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I'll see if we get a few more hands. It's that triangle at the bottom. It's like food and shelter and safety, and then money and job, and then love and belonging comes third, and then self-actualization is at the top. Sound familiar? What if I told you Abraham Maslow never made a hierarchy? A few organizational psychologists, after he died, built up a consulting practice, and they started working with organizations, and they wanted to simplify some of his frameworks. And so what they weaved into their explanations were the myths within our culture, which are that the way that you cultivate well-being is you pull yourself up by your bootstraps as a rugged individual. You get yourself a job, you get food, you worry about having friends and loved ones once you establish yourself financially. That's how we've optimized our systems. I'm a behavior scientist and a licensed therapist. I've trained thousands of therapists. I've worked with hundreds of schools, educators from preschool, elementary school, middle school, high school, college. Our education system is broken. for a whole litany of reasons. What I'm going to talk about right now is how we transform learning and development for what I call Work 4.0. Work 0.5 was hunter-gatherer and nomads. It was about safety, security, and food. But there's a reason why that's why we spent most of our time doing that stuff, and it was to serve our deepest need. See, a human doesn't stand a chance against a lion, tiger, or bear. Oh my. But 10 might, and 100 certainly do. If you take an infant and you put them down in the woods, surrounded by 10 tigers or dragons or machine guns, it doesn't matter what you surround them with. If mom walks away, what's that baby going to do? Cry. Because our deepest yearning is for connection. If it weren't, why would there be countless stories of people in the Holocaust who died in concentration camps from giving their food to other people? Oh, but food is their deepest need. Of course, it's our deepest need, certainly more so than love and belonging. It's not how it works. In Romania in the 80s and 90s, anybody remember those stories about those Romanian orphanages all over 60 Minutes? What they found were there were Romanian infants that would die because they had too many infants in these orphanages. So they didn't have enough humans to actually come in and give them enough human touch. So the stress built up in their bodies because they didn't have other human nervous systems to co-regulate with them. So they died. We are suffering from overwhelm and chronic stress states. Depression, anxiety, ADHD, overdose, suicide are outcomes of overwhelm from a nervous system that isn't getting its needs met. So what are our needs? It was sort of weird for me. See, I wanted to fix myself when I finally decided not to jump off that bridge. See, there was something pulling at me saying, don't do that. And I figured if there was even a part of me that wasn't sure, it seemed like it was like the entire Congress within me had to be aligned on this one. So I decided to pull myself back. And I went home and I looked at myself in the mirror. And you know what I realized? I don't know who that is. So before I kill this guy, I should at least try to figure out who he is. So I left school. I moved back in with my parents. This was in Southwest Virginia. They were living in Central Jersey. And the problem was I was starting to really lose any sense of reality. See, because there's a thing that happens when you're struggling with opiate withdrawal. You start to replace your oxytocin processes within your body, which are the processes that happen when you're cuddling with a loved one, or talking deeply with a friend, or when a mother is breastfeeding with their infant, or moments of orgasm. It's this immense safety. So if suddenly you're not producing oxytocin to go into your oxytocin receptors, you actually can't experience safety physiologically in your body. So I just felt this permanent state of panic. This became a real problem when it came time for falling asleep. My heart would be racing all day throughout the day. I would feel warm. I would lay down to go to sleep, and I would fall asleep after really focusing on my breath. And about 15 minutes later, I would wake up in a full panic attack, sweating. And then I would just have to kind of calm myself down again, this like deep sense of terror. The first few times it happened, I ran out of my room, kind of looking for monsters, only to realize the monsters were inside of me. So this kind of became a nightly ritual. For 6 months, I slept for 15 minutes at a time, regulating myself back to be able to fall asleep maybe 3 or 4 times. So I was losing my grip on reality because a brain that doesn't get a whole lot of sleep starts to get real dissociated. So I wanted to fix this. I figured it was a physical problem. I just needed some tangible answers. So I started reaching out to people. I would actually show up at the offices of some New York Times best-selling psychologists because I was desperate. And quite frankly, because I look the way that I look, I was treated fairly generously, actually. Nobody called the cops on me. People actually were like, you know what, come on in. And I would spout out and just kind of ramble about what I was experiencing, and they would help me. They would talk to me. And I started to get this like greater understanding. So then I went back to undergrad, and I sat in my bed as I was like getting ready for my first day of classes again, and I really thought about it. It's like, am I going to kill myself? And I wasn't. And it wasn't that quite frankly, I had hope. It was that my mom was in so much terror about what I was experiencing. I couldn't imagine the guilt of strapping her with the grief. The greatest predictor of resilience in children that experience trauma is having one high-quality, trusting relationship. Because again, connection is our deepest need. I didn't feel loved from my mom for most of my childhood. I was a kid with ADHD. I couldn't experience many emotions, but I could tell she was trying. And that was enough for me. It was enough to keep me alive. And so then I thought, okay, well, if I'm not going to kill myself, I am wildly uncomfortable. This is really uncomfortable. Just a permanent panic attack. It's not ideal. So I was sitting there, I was okay, well, if I'm going to live for like a few decades, this kind of sucks. Like, what could I do about this? What I had been doing was chasing comfort everywhere I could look for it. I had an iPhone 1, and so I would be on here, on WebMDing and going through chat rooms. I learned a lot about neurotransmitters. I was showing up at the doorsteps of neuroscientists, neuropsychologists, biologists, psychologists. I was calling people out of the blue, nutritionists. I was getting really regimented about my workout nutrition, trying to learn everything I could. But the more I chased down comfort, the less I found it. So I thought, maybe what if I actually just accept that I'm never going to be comfortable again in my life? What if this is actually now a part of my experience of life? What could still be worth doing in my life? And I thought about, when I was 15, 16, 17, I worked with kids at a summer camp. And then I started to remember my own childhood and how I was suspended for so much of my elementary school years. And I was like, surely there's something else that could have been done. As I was talking to all of these professionals that had been researching about nervous systems and well-being, I was discovering there were some things that didn't happen in my schooling that probably would have helped. So I decided, I knew what my purpose would be. I would fix the education system. See, that was the problem with the education system. They shouldn't have these hands working on it. So it's a bit of a lofty goal, but the nice thing is it reoriented my entire psyche. See, one core need that we have for human beings is belonging. To feel seen and valued somewhere. It's innate. I call it our relational regulation matrix. Anyone in here ever heard of attachment theory, attachment research when it comes to parenting or couples, love relationships? Yeah, same stuff. So our wiring for how we show up in relationships, our tolerance for intimacy, the ways that we show up when intimacy gets threatened, when rejection happens, or fear of abandonment or betrayal, all that stuff is wired into our nervous systems based on our interactions and our attachment relationships. When we're born, it's our parents. Ideally, there becomes enough support there that then we begin to explore. We take what we've wired in that relationship and we try it out and we sharpen it in other relationships. But this relational regulation matrix is inside all of you. I could have you draw it. I've done it with 5-year-olds, I've done it with 85-year-olds. 3 circles. Center circle, the people you trust most in your life. It's a lie to think that you don't care about what anyone thinks of you. You can't wire that out of you. It's your deepest wiring. It's part of being human. We're tribal. So inside, you have these people that you trust the most. Just outside of there, then you have these other people that are kind of like, they could move into the center circle, but they're not there right now. And then really, there's everybody else. The problem is, we live in this society where we are acutely aware of thousands upon millions of people's perception of us in some scale. And we start to orient the wrong way. We think about people outside of our center circle, as opposed to thinking about those relationships in the center circle. But those ones most in the center are the most relevant for our capacity for regulating stress. Anyone in here ever heard of the term window of tolerance? So window of tolerance is this idea of stress you can experience before you go into an overwhelm zone. Comfort zone, challenge zone, crisis zone, overwhelm zone, trauma zone. Stress is good. If I'm out in the street and a car is coming, I hope I get stressed and I move. The problem with stress is when it stays on. That's when you get autoimmune disorders, because stress is eaten away at your body. So we need to be able to regulate stress. It needs to be able to come on, come off. You stay in a crisis state too long, turns into an overwhelm state. The ability to regulate and go from crisis to challenge to comfort zone, that is determined by your platform of stress, called your window of tolerance. It starts to get built in your parenting relationships when you're a child. And we can expand or shrink our window of tolerance. When I was struggling with withdrawal, my window of tolerance became like this. Any bit of stress felt like immense panic, like I had machine guns and tigers coming at me. But we can expand it. The way you expand it is threefold. One is having co-regulatory in-person interactions with people at the core of your relational regulation matrix. You can communicate with people digitally, but over a video call, you only get about an 80% oxytocin boost. And if you know it's a robot, you don't get any oxytocin boost, by the way. So if anyone thinks we're going to solve our loneliness pandemic by giving everyone an AI girlfriend, no data to back that up quite yet. Connection is one key. The other key, though, is confidence. Confidence breaks into two pieces: purpose and accomplishment. Purpose. I have clear and compelling values. I know what a fulfilling life would mean to me. I've worked with thousands of people in their 30s and 40s that tell me the same story. I followed the rules. I played the game. I built the big, bright, shiny life, and it's hollow on the inside. Because fulfillment can't be handed to you. No one can hand you a map. Your values are written through the combination of your biology that you're born with, your lived experiences, and the biography you write about those experiences. No one can tell you what they are. You have to discover them. And you don't have complete control over them, but you can influence them. Here's the magic of defining your values. They did these studies about 35, 36 years ago. There were these kids that loved to draw. They would spend all day drawing these pictures. They were like, we're going to show people how motivation works. We are going to amplify this kid's drawing. We're going to get this kid drawing even more. So they started giving him these golden stickers. Every time he completed a drawing, you trade it in, you get a golden sticker. Anyone want to guess what happened? They stopped drawing because you actually minimize their incentives. A golden sticker is nothing compared to the immensity of wonder that could come from me doing this because it makes me feel a little bit more alive. You have diminished it. So bribes and threats and inertia stand no match for someone that is motivated by an expression of their self who is pursuing greater aliveness. Bribes and threats aren't enough for the scale of creativity that we need today. Here's what defining your values gives you. It's the first thing I did as a therapist with any single person. I can do it with anybody. In about 20 minutes, I can sit down. I'll ask you a few questions. One, who are the people you admire most? What are the things they do you admire most about them? What are the moments in your life where you felt the most lost or heartbroken? What was missing? What were the moments in your life you were most alive? What was happening there? By us defining our values and understanding their priority structure, we start to unlock infinite motivation, because I can deepen a relationship, but when I set love as the most important thing as my value, I can never capture it, but I can always make progress towards it. They did these studies with monkeys a few years ago about dopamine, because they thought, dopamine, it gets surged with cocaine, it gets surged when you run a race, it must be about reward. So they carved open these monkeys' brains, put a little neuroreceptor in there. This is the reason why we struggle to know a lot about neurotransmitters in humans, because they won't let us just plug stuff into their brain like animals. And so what they did was, there was this food that would drop off, there was this light, and there was this lever. When the light went on, monkey pressed the lever, gets the food. They thought the dopamine would be at the highest when the food came out, but it wasn't. The dopamine was at its highest when the light came on. Because dopamine is not reward for accomplishment, dopamine is fuel for action. So what happened was, the monkeys, the light goes on, gets some dopamine, then they press the lever, and then the food comes out. Here's the thing though, the dopamine doesn't come out if they lock the lever. So if the monkey no longer believes that they have the capacity to press the lever, then the dopamine no longer surges. So if you don't build confidence by establishing evidence through actions that you are who you think you can be, that you can make progress, then it's impossible to get dopamine to surge. But if you can define what really matters to you, then you unlock this infinite motivation. When I was a teenager, my number one value was cool. I had a persona that I thought would give me these little snack-sized bites of connection called attention, and I would just sort of act out. I was a class clown. I was sort of this like Johnny Bravo-like character. And I just wanted people to think I was cool until I got really addicted to all kinds of stuff. And then life got really painful. And then my number one value became comfort. Neither of those led me to a place that was very fulfilling. So then my number one value became knowledge. I wanted to talk to anybody that could help me understand how humans are wired. What did I not get in my education system? What could I fix? But that also was just like a reorientation of the anxiety. I still wasn't feeling anything on the inside. But the key was there was something within me that said, there's something about chasing down knowledge that feels like it's going to make me more proud of myself, to be able to go to sleep at night. What I discovered through that, as I was going through that process, they do this really annoying thing. When you become a licensed therapist or when you become a mindfulness meditation teacher, they make you actually like connect with your own inner world. And I started to realize that I was giving myself these games to acquire knowledge, to fill up this sense of scarcity inside of me so I could have control. I could fix all the bad things out there so I wouldn't feel any bad things in here. And I realized the more I could actually feel my emotions in my body, I got even more information about what really matters to me. I got even more information about what my lived experiences were. Remember, biography written about our lived experiences within our biology. So to be able to define your values, you need emotional regulation skills, which don't develop naturally. They're taught as skills. As I developed mine, I realized what I admired most were actually people that were vulnerable and authentic, and who showed up and cared about other people. People that seemed to put their all into something. That seemed to really inspire me. I wanted more of that. It wasn't knowledge that was the most important thing to me. It was heart. Doing things with my full heart. Doing things in a way that felt like I was serving this greater sense of heart. And once I realized that and optimized towards that, my whole life started to get a whole lot more fulfilling. So we're wired to seek out new lands, new foods, new sexual partners, to acquire and make progress. And to do that, we want autonomy, which is why if you take a kid that's really sensitive, that shows challenging behaviors, and you just try to punish them, what ends up happening is their behaviors actually get worse because you're breaking in the walls, and they're going to fight harder and harder for their sense of autonomy. This is the magic within business or learning and development, which is how do I maximize autonomy within a structure that also maximizes accountability? You can't neglect either. So when you define your values, when you understand the people that you manage or that you're trying to teach or develop and the core of their identity, who they want to be and what drives them inherently, instead of them doing stuff to earn a paycheck from you or to earn a golden star, or to avoid criticism, now any interaction with you is you're supporting them and becoming the best version of themselves. Totally different dynamic. And now they have a sense of autonomy, because now you know what their values are. So anything you can give them that you connect to their values, if you can connect that to your mission and vision, now suddenly they're just becoming their most vital self. They're going on an adventure. That's how we were able to recruit our head of product out of Amazon. I thought, we're a startup. We raised $1 million. How could I possibly recruit anybody? And I realized I am an amazing storyteller. And I know how to identify people's values. I can sell you adventure, which is something we're starving for right now. Let's go over needs we've identified. Belonging, purpose, accomplishment, making progress towards things that matter to us. That's how we build confidence. It doesn't really matter what those are. That's why you'll see Jordan Peterson say things like make your bed every morning. It doesn't matter what the goals are, just don't commit to anything unless you're going to make it sacred. Because then you're undermining your trust within yourself. Confidence is two Latin words, cum, fidere, with trust. You want to trust yourself? Stop lying to yourself. When you make a commitment, meet it. And then you'll get that brick of evidence. And guess what that confidence does? It also expands your window of tolerance. Okay, well then how else do I get to those values? Well, a lot of them are reinforced and shaped by our interactions with people. But really, I need those skills for feeling in my body. And that's harder than ever because we have been lied to. I call this the techno-productive optimism myth. We started hearing about it in the 90s and 2000s. Here's the story. It'll sound familiar to you. Technology is amazing. All we need to do is get more cash, and we're going to build more technology that will allow us to share and spread information faster, and that speed of sharing information at greater scale and scope will make us more productive, and that greater productivity will create free time, and people will use their free time to increase their well-being. Amazing. That sounds wonderful. Internet, software, how did that go? How did listening to that story and not passing any meaningful regulation in the last 25 years for technology companies, how did that go? My generation, for the first time, isn't expected to live longer than their parents. Suicide and overdoses have multiplied by 10 in the last 20 years. For the first time, a 30-year-old isn't making as much money as their parents were at 30 years old. Oh, it seems like the well-being isn't magically just going to make itself better, because the technologies that we utilize and we engage in with our attention end up shaping how we then spend our time. So those technologies have to be designed in a way that optimize and enhance our well-being and understand our 6 core needs. Otherwise, they undermine them. So we have less capacity for understanding and knowing what we're feeling, because in 2001, rates of stress and anxiety started to spike with 9/11. And around that, there was a precursor 10 years before that with the birth of the 24-hour news cycle. See, we reached the point in the 80s where over 80% of Americans had a TV in their home. But it wasn't until the OJ trial where suddenly Americans built this new behavior where news wasn't just in the morning and the evening. It was all the time. And we never let that behavior go. We carried that behavior in how we engage with social media and how we engage with our smartphones now. So now we have this continuous partial attention, which has eroded any sense of space and co-regulation. So children, while the divorce rate has been skyrocketing, are now born with far fewer emotionally available adults to help them build the capacities for regulating stress at the time when there is more stimulus competing for their attention than any human being has ever had to deal with. Diminished capacity for knowing what we're feeling in our emotions. We have a need for cultivating embodiment. When you don't embody and process your emotions in your body, they become stored as trauma. We're wired for sensation. There's not an emotion that a human experiences that some human somewhere doesn't pay to experience. Sensation is how we process our reality. We're wired to seek out information, so we have this knowledge so we can survive, so we can seek out new lands, new foods. Again, it's the system we were built within. And coherence. Our mind is always creating a story about what we're experiencing. So we are also wired to cultivate insight. But we over-intellectualize without processing enough of our emotions because we don't have the co-regulatory experiences and we're not taught the skills to process our emotions. So what do we do about that? Well, part of it's a societal design problem. In the 80s was the first time where this ratio really started to shift. See, up until the 80s, there was this different ratio going on around accessible content and seconds of available attention that you could spend. Even when the printing press was invented in the 1400s, the richest people in the 1500s and 1600s, there was an end to your library. You would live at home, your family was your workforce, you could go outside, you could go into the home, you could run around, maybe there were some books and some paintings, but there was an end to the content you could pay attention to, that you could access in a day. There's no end anymore. We now have infinite content. Since the 80s, it has just shifted completely. We have access to more content, any one person in this room, than any human being could consume in a lifetime. So part of it is we need better boundaries and structures for how we relate with each other, with our technology, and how it relates to us. But to do that, we need to empower groups of people. See, the problem when we don't have empowered groups of people that know how to build trust in ways that regenerate each other, in ways that serve our 6 core needs, what ends up happening is our window of tolerance shrinks because we don't have those co-regulatory experiences. When that shrinks, we avoid conversations about gun violence, mental health disorder, tech legislation, because it's overwhelming. It's too many moving pieces. That's just a lot. I have my stuff over here. That's just too much. So if we're going to build better regulations for something like AI, we can't trust the people building the technologies to do it. We need groups of organizations to do it. If we're going to transform our education system, it's not going to come from the top down. That's what caused the problem. It has to be communities of people that are empowered with visibility about how their tax dollars are being spent, with visibility about the specific programs that dollars within a school district are being spent on. The only way you get that are advocacy groups of people coming together. We have to empower groups of people, bottom up. I simplify this process. We have a product we build that goes in and takes communication data. How are you communicating on calls, Slack, and email, and empower you as a manager and as an organization to have visibility. Before I came up here, I took this water. It was clear before, and I grabbed 5 or 6 random things from the bar, crushed them on the table, slid them in this cup. I need a volunteer. Oh, nobody? Come on. Sorry, what's your name?
David.
David, will you drink this?
What's my incentive?
David doesn't want to drink this. Is that shocking to anybody? Now, David, here's a question for you.
Yeah.
Scale 0 to 100. How confident are you that someone somewhere could make this drinkable if they had the right technology?
0 to 100?
Yeah.
100.
100. Why?
I mean, you could grind it up. You could, yeah.
We have all kinds of technologies for purifying water, right? We do a shit ton of that in New York. Sure. And how would you know once it was clean? How would you know it was drinkable? If I could give you access to anything in the world, are there things you could use?
You could have a lab that could test it.
You have a lab that could test it. It would give you data that would show you it was clean.
Look at the data. Yes.
Great. We have a culture problem. Our cultures are making people more stressed and burning them out, which is why we have a retention problem. And we can't clean water if we can't measure what's toxic about it. So what we do within our business is we take the communication data and we help you see what is your culture. Culture comes from the Latin word for care. And culture is built by the behaviors that you reinforce, disallow, and allow. We need more visibility on what we're doing. That's also what we need when it comes to education, learning, and development. We were thinking about bringing in this guy on our team who works at Microsoft, and he was telling me his manager was out that week because she was doing manager training. And I was like, oh, I'm so curious. How is Microsoft, top 3 richest company in the world, leading the AI innovation? How are they doing manager training? I must know. And he said, well, she has to take a week off. She's been there for 20 years. And she has about 18 hours of video to watch. They spend a lot of money on shaping and building. So it's like a Christopher Nolan-like product experience. I went like this. What? It's like, have you talked to her about how that's going? He's like, yeah. I was like, has she mentioned how much of it is useful and relevant? He said, yeah, maybe 10%. 90% of her time, you're having her take a week off of work, and 90% of her time, you're having her watch a video. That's how we're leading learning and innovation. Learning should be based on you and brought to you. That's at least what we should get for how much data we've given out over the last 20 years. You have enough data about who I am and what I want. TikTok knows exactly the little 30-second video I most want to watch. They've got an algorithm for engaging me in entertainment. We should be able to base skill development on who you are and who you want to be based on the context of where you work. So that's what we're doing. And that's what we need to do within all of learning and development. Real-time feedback, like when you go to a golf simulator and they can tell you 100 different data points about your swing in that moment. Real-time feedback, personalized, based on you, and focused on skill development. And this means letting go of things like memorization. We've known for 15 years memorization isn't that helpful. Not nearly as helpful as critical thinking and creativity. About 30 years ago, NASA asked this guy to make this test, to start testing kids in school so they could early identify who the creative geniuses would be, that they could put on a gifted track that then they could take into NASA. Again, this is when we were competing with the Soviet Union. And so this guy made this test, and he gave it, and there was an astounding discovery. Over 80% of kindergartners were creative geniuses. But by the time they got into 8th grade, it was about 15%. The school system was making them less creative. So in order to transform how things happen, I've been in those schools. You need to transform the culture so that the teachers have enough support and willingness to want to learn new skills and have new ways of being. You need to transform supervision. It needs to become dispersed because 2 administrators isn't enough for 150 teachers in a building. Imagine having 2 managers for 150 employees in any of your businesses. It doesn't work. You have to distribute ownership of what happens. I do this with a core model of how you transform culture. It's 3 pieces. It connects to the 6 core needs. We'll go over the 5 we've talked about. Connection, coherence or insight, embodiment, purpose, accomplishment. The other is mindfulness. We have an intrinsic drive to orient where and when we are. More than ever, the greatest skill everyone needs to be cultivating right now is the ability to pay attention to what you want to. That's mindfulness, paying attention on purpose to the present moment. It's a skill, and we need to develop those skills. You can build a culture that does that, or a cultural system or an organization with 3 pieces: people, purpose, processes. So 1, are you clear about what your mission and vision are? Do you invest in understanding what people's values are and connect that to what they're doing on a daily basis? 2, processes that are rooted in what people value and prioritize regeneration and sustainability over short-term bursts of return. That means prioritizing window of tolerance, prioritizing recovery. It means not thinking that throwing a ping pong table and a beer tap into your office means you're improving culture and people's engagement. It's actually simpler than that. You have to have better conversations with people to see what they need so they can work hard and recover. And building people skills. The skills to actually build trust with people so that they feel supported, which are measurable skills that the research has established. When I got trained as a behavior scientist and I started going into schools, or when I started going into workplaces, or when I started going to therapy centers, I felt the way that I would imagine a surgeon would. If we sent them back in time 250 years ago and saw people doing surgery without washing their hands. We've gone from typewriter to computer to internet to AI. We've had that same rate of innovation with the behavior science. This is not a knowledge gap problem around how we empower learning, development, growth, or sustained performance. It's the implementation problem. We need better tools. We need better systems. We need people like you all who care about learning, who can absorb any of this that was helpful for you and actually apply it in your life, especially towards a group that you're connected to that can become more empowered to create things and hold other aspects of society accountable. Thank you.